We good to go? Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. It's just really great to have all of us together again at the start of a new academic year, and good to see everyone. I was going to offer just a few sort of introductory comments and then turn it over to the superintendent, who will do give us what we're calling an interim update on the beginning of the academic year. First, a little bit about this meeting, because obviously we're meeting next week, and we'll have an executive committee meeting. And the superintendent and I talked about this a little bit. I think the goal for this meeting is actually, we just haven't been together as a newly constituted executive committee. And the way that those board meetings go, it's so compressed and so hectic. I thought it was important for us to get together and spend some time together, talk about issues that we're thinking about, issues that we can kind of clear out the underbrush so that next week is even more efficient. I told the superintendent, I don't know if this was to his pleasure or chagrin, that what will probably happen is there'll probably be more questions coming out of this meeting maybe than answers, which is okay. I think it'll make our next meeting more effective. And we do have a couple things from a substantive standpoint. I think it'll be helpful for us to get through. A couple thoughts. As you guys know, great privilege to serve as the president of the board. I started that role this summer, and as a part of that role, I've tried to be very intentional about getting to Lexington. And I'll just reiterate this for you all. I've probably been there, what would you say, General? A lot?
Maybe about 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, that's right. I've been up about 4 or 5 times for various events. And I'll just start by encouraging the members of the executive committee, go back as often as you can. Every time I go back, I learn more. You have more interactions with cadets, you have more interactions with staff, you have more interactions with professors. I'm sure everyone's invited to the superintendent's box football games, right? It's a great chance to walk around and you just absorb so much. And it's really been eye-opening for me. And so I'd encourage all of you to do it as much as you can. I wanted to talk a little bit about priorities, and I don't want to overemphasize it, but as I took over, I talked with a lot of you. People sent me things they were thinking about, issues they cared about, and there's a few that I just want to set out at the beginning that were sort of what I would call repeat players that a lot of people talked about. 3 in particular, and a lot of people had different ones, but 3 in particular. One was affordability. A lot of the board members want to focus on affordability going forward as a market differentiator for us. There's a lot of competition for talent, and it's something that we can do, not just because it's the right thing to do for young people and families to have a massive burden at the end of the process, but also it can differentiate us from our competition, which is quite good. So that's a topic that came up, and I think we'll probably see some work done between Teddy's committee and the academic affairs committee and some others to start thinking about what we can do on the affordability front. And that covers Virginia and out-of-state cadets. I think for out-of-state cadets in particular, it's quite a burden. So that issue came up a lot. I'll put 2 things together that came up a lot in my discussions with board members. Really, the successful integration of the new commandant is something that a lot of people are focused on and want to see that go off without a hitch. I've probably been with him on 3 or 4 separate occasions, and I've had a just really very positive impression of him. I've watched him interact with the cadet leadership. It's been a very positive thing, and so at this point, everything looks good, and I'm hopeful for that. Combined with that are issues around sort of core discipline, core morale, issues that I think the Cadet and Military Affairs Committee will certainly be focused on. In fact, I think I heard the other day from multiple sources that Ernie came up to Virginia. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah, and spent time with the commandant so that he can start to to build that relationship and be involved. So I think that's all very positive. And then the third area is also related to a new hire that I'm sure the superintendent will talk about. We have a new head of marketing and communications, and with the external affairs committee, and we've talked about this a lot before, just ensuring that we are putting our absolute best foot forward when it comes to our external marketing and communications. And that's across the board, across all the different many ways we communicate with the outside world. And so I think you'll see the board taking a keen interest in that. And then, of course, that will dovetail with the arrival of the new institute official who will be here. So that's how the summer's sort of shaken out. I think I will turn this over to the superintendent, who's going to do an interim update for us. And unless any of the other board members have anything they'd like to say, Chair, at this point. Okay. General, why don't you take it away?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to all the XCOM members. Typically what I've done in the past is I've used the executive committee meetings sort of as a preview of what's going to be what I had planned on discussing and the staff had planned on presenting at the full board meeting during that superintendent's portion, which now is what, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 2 hours. And since we're at the beginning of the academic year, there are a number of things that we will talk about just to kind of give you a perspective of a few things with respect to how we're going into the academic year from an organizational perspective. Some of the communications that I've had thus far with staff, faculty, and the cadet corps, and then what I've communicated as priorities and things of focus areas that I will have. And the idea in this session, at least for me, is to solicit feedback from the executive committee about what I'm kind of teeing up. And if there's anything else that you all as a committee are interested in, or you want me to be prepared to talk about in a particular topic. And so that's how I've done this in the past. And if that's okay with the board president and the members of the XCOM, I will go down a series of things that you can expect to hear during the board. I won't give you full details here because we've got another XCOM and then we've got the board meeting itself, but I just try to hit the high points and then just see if the board XCOM has any particular direction about kind of going one way or the other on a particular topic. So I typically will start off obviously with matriculation, how matriculation went. As you know, our matriculation numbers were 498, which exceeded the goal that we'd set for ourselves of 495, so second year in a row where we exceeded the numbers. Joe and Shannon will talk to you all from the perspective of the admissions and recruiting lens on how that whole process went. I think what we saw was that for the first time probably in about 10 or 12 years, we had a very high applicant pool. That was aided greatly by a number of the initiatives that have been put in place, like the Common App, like the CRM, like kind of the retooling of the staffing effort, like the hiring of an external recruiter that is kind of more regionally focused, like the things that we did to reestablish with the alumni agencies, new cadet recruiting events, and so on and so forth. And so with that very, very high applicant pool, we were able to meet our numbers. The devil in the detail that they'll be able to talk about will be just what we saw as we got towards the end of the cycle and matriculation day, which was we had gotten to a point where we had it as far as deposits up to 520 deposits. And then what we refer to, what they've educated me on, this summer melt began to occur. And over a period of about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but certainly 2 weeks, what you begin to see is you begin to see kind of a bleeding off of students. And then Joe this year, because we had a pretty healthy wait list of about 200 kids, they were able to kind of pull and push. So when you lose one, you can reach out to somebody and stand a chance of getting them if they had indicated that VMI was their number one choice. It still resulted in us getting to that number of 498. But again, we were as high as 520 in our deposits. So this year, as we think about the new goal of 515, right? I'm asking the team to go in and do a little bit of analysis to tell us more about what we're going to have to shoot for, because you're going to have to overshoot in order to count on that melt. The melt was about what we expected from a historical perspective. I think it's like 5%. So that occurred, right? But how do you get to that higher number in order to settle on the goal number or slightly higher than the goal? So they'll be able to talk about that because what it boils down to is this year with this recruitment number, you'll see that we're more selective, right? Selectivity dropped because of the higher number. But the yield was still low. And so you meet the yield because you had the high applicant pool. You get the number because of the high applicant pool, but the yield being so low is something that we got to think about in terms of strategies to ensure that we get the numbers we want with a relatively good yield, somewhere between 45% and 50% yield, as opposed to being somewhere below 45%. And then the selectivity coming in, the fact that we can kind of pick and choose a higher quality of young men. Overall, compared to what the appointed GPAs look like, which was a very strong class of candidates that we appointed, roughly about 3.7, the GPA of the actual matriculants was about 3.6. Right? Still very strong. The reality is we still have somewhat of a bell curve when it comes to those students that actually end up showing up. You have some that are on the high end of the spectrum, average 3.6, and then you have some that are a little bit lower on the low end spectrum. Typically, if someone has a GPA that is a 2.5 or lower, then they bring that to me for my approval. And usually I'm going to listen to Joe articulate why as to the reason for the admittance of this particular student. And Joe, in the past couple of years, has told me, sir, sometimes I'll bring you one kid that I want to take a chance on because they have a backstory. And that backstory might be that they come from a home where, you know, they're having to do multiple things. They're having to work a job, they're having to take care of a sibling or a parent or something like that, which might affect their ability to be focused on their academics. And oftentimes with that backstory, we've had a couple where an alum was very high on the kid and was recommending that we accept him into the core, things like that occur. So you'll hear about that. As far as the numbers, you'll hear kind of what the distribution looks like. But I think one of the things that I would point out is that for the second year in a row, we had a high number of women candidates. So 86 this year was the second highest in terms of women matriculants in the core. And I think this is second highest, and either last year or the year before, I think it's the year before, we had a high number as well. So we had two high numbers of women matriculants in the core. As far as the activities that took place starting from matriculation day on through Hell Week, when it comes to attrition, we've seen a fairly low attrition. We, up to the period of Hell Week, which is about 10 days, we probably attrited at about 3.6%, which is lower than historical attrition, which is about 5%. But we did have a bump up from the end of Hell Week to Census Day. Census Day being that first day of classes when add and drop of classes is done. Kids are locked into their schedule, and now they're primarily focused on going to class, going to participate in the military activities, going to participate in athletic activities, on and on and on. So we did have a slight bump of about 5 students. So we sit somewhere, at least as of yesterday, with the commandant's report that I get, somewhere around 25 or 26 that had it treated. But that's still very good. That's still very good. We, for the second year in a row, we set up a retention control center. And what that allows is sometimes you get a kid who's having a bad day. Sometimes you have a kid who's just firmly made up their mind and VMI isn't the place for them. And the retention control center is manned with some staff, mental health, the chief diversity officers in there at times, and then cadets to just kind of talk through with the young man or woman that decision. Commandant will talk to them about the decision that they're getting ready to make as a 17 or 18-year-old that's going to have, long-term repercussions. There have been instances where we've been able to get the young man or woman to say, just having a bad day, talk to your parents, and then they get back, reintegrate into the activities of Hell Week. And then there's some, and I've been down there and talked to you, where some of them will tell you the stories. Grandpa said he'll pay for any school. Well, he won't pay for any other school than VMI, but I'll pay the full rate, the full freight of going to VMI. And, sometimes you have examples like that. Sometimes you have some that get there and they say, hey, it's just not the school for me. And I decided that I didn't want the 24/7 military-like environment, those types of things. So we learn a lot through those sessions. And so we'll continue to do those. I think the one bit of feedback that I got from Sergeant Major is that we'll probably look at extending the retention control center a couple of days beyond Hell Week, because again, when we had that spike up, we had already shut the retention control center down. So that's something that we'll look at for next year. But it's something that we will continue to work on. As we enter into the Corps' return after Hell Week, we have, I speak to all classes. I speak to all 18 Division I athletic teams. I speak to the Corps leaders. I speak to the cadre, in addition to faculty and staff, which is another separate set of discussions. But I talk to them about a couple of messages that I want to reinforce. And one, I tell them kind of what my focus areas are for the year. I talk to them about, particularly the RATs, about the vast number of wellness resources that we have, right? Mental health, we've got a Miller Academic Center, we've got a writing center and a math center. And I tell them, don't sit and struggle with your academics and let it become too late. Go and take advantage of these resources. I talk to, and this is a point of emphasis for this year, talking to the first class. I've been disappointed over the last couple of years when it came to discipline of RATs in seeing that oftentimes those that were empowered with the role of being a dyke weren't really doing their job, right? A lot of cadets, as we all know, don't wear rank. They aren't captains and lieutenants, but we give them responsibility as a first classman of at least one person. And it's up to them to coach, teach, mentor, and guide them through the process. They know more about VMI than the RATs do. And so to hear when I have a RAT in front of me on a discipline, and I ask, well, where's your dyke? And where was your dyke in the process? And then I hear from the RAT, well, my dyke told me I don't need to come and do RAT-related things, and they miss the point. The dyke misses the point that it's not about the little RAT duties that you give your RAT to go pick up the laundry and go do it. It's about the knowledge that you have and your responsibility to guide that RAT process so that they grow and learn what it means to be a member of the board of cadets. And so I paint it as a picture of, hey, this is your legacy. For every RAT that attrits, right, then you lose a portion of your legacy, right? You don't get to come back 4 years from now to their graduation. You don't get to come back 5 or 10 years from now and talk about who your rat was because they're gone. And so I stress that as an important feature for the Dyke system. And I've let the class president know that that's something I'm going to be paying attention to this year. I talk a lot about the honor code and the real consequences associated with the honor code. For the 3 years going into the 4th year that I've been here, I've stressed to the honor code board education, right? Education is probably the most important thing that they can do as a board as a whole, in addition to running good trials and to make sure that they are educating the core, particularly the rats, but certainly the whole core, so that people don't take chances or run risk on violating the honor code, because the consequences are serious. The consequences are fine. So I talk that. I continue to emphasize, and one of the great things about that I'm seeing about Lee Havard is, number one, he has a presence. He doesn't. His ability to interact with the core leaders is extremely good for someone who's just now coming into the job. Right? He's not worried about empowering the cadets to do things, and he circles them back when they kind of walk or go outside of the left and right limits that they've been given. And he's not, trying to kind of hold on and control things. His interaction with the core leaders seems to be very good. He asks good questions, insightful questions to gain understanding of various different things in terms of the systems and the procedures that are in place. And so the watchwords that I've given him, similar to the last 3 years, is, number one, be professional in what you do, the conduct of the rat line. Let's make it professional. And then make sure that the things that are being done by the class are being done with a purpose. And so he's taken that message and continues to communicate that to the first class leaders. And then, this whole thing about core discipline, I spoke to the class and I let them know that I had seen the video. There's a video out. I know that the board is interested in at least hearing my perspective on it. I told them I'd seen the video, and I reminded them what the Code of the Cadet speaks to and why we revitalize the Code of Cadet, and that's the expectation that as cadets, right, in Lexington, you're kind of a fixture, right? People who come to town as tourists, they see these young people walking around in these odd-looking uniforms, but you are kind of a fixture in the community. And so people will measure the institute by what they see in your behavior. And so I made mention to them that, hey, you all need to police yourselves because I'm aware of it now, and the commandant is aware of it. And so if behavior uptown, in or out of uniform, becomes a problem, then actions are going to be taken. So the charge has been given to the Cadet Corps to police themselves on behavior uptown in terms of what goes on. And, the buddy system should apply, which is, hey, watch out for your buddy. If you got somebody who's had too much to drink, get them back on post, right? Get them back on post so that they don't do something that's going to get them run afoul, because we've got plenty of regulations to deal with those types of things. And I know the commandant and the deputy commandant aren't afraid to use those tools.
So without getting into details, which particular video are you referring to, actually?
So there was a video that I asked Bill to find, and Bill sent me, and it had to do with Lexington City Council. And there's a lady by the name of Donahue, I believe, and she spoke about a house that was next to her and some behavior of cadets in the Corps. Now, part of it, she was talking about, she spent what I thought was a fair amount of time talking about parking, right? And how parking was difficult because you had cadets up there taking up most of the parking, street parking. And that's been an ongoing issue. And that's something that Colonel Bogart, when he was commandant, not only he, but Dallas's team with Jeff Bubar was working with the city to correct the amount of parking that was being taken up. But then she brought up this issue of some behavior that's unacceptable by members of the cadet corps. Okay. And so I talked to them about that. So new personnel, we are two people that are new to the staff that is being discussed and getting a lot of positive feedback. That's Lee Havard and Jamal Walton, our athletic director. I think the thing that has been impressive about the two of them is they're working together. They're collaborating together. One of the messages that I gave the faculty and the staff was that discipline of the Corps is not just commandant staff responsibility. Okay, it's a whole of institute approach. So to the degree that a faculty member, right, can set the tone in their classroom about bad behavior, they ought to be making sure that that happens. And it starts from everything with the section march, how you deal with and respond to the section marcher, right? If you kind of minimize the role of the section marcher that has a leadership role and taking accountability in that classroom, then you kind of set the tone for the standard of conduct and the standard of discipline in that classroom. If you have a cadet that's in there that is not meeting your standard, right? Well, use the tools that you have available to enforce conduct of this. The same with the coaches, right? To make sure that their student athletes are bought in and demonstrating things that they don't run afoul of the standards and the expectations of the rest of the school. So Lee has taken that and run with it. I'll talk a little bit about his background. Sherry Wallace, our director of communications. I'll talk about her. Sherry probably just got here last week. She got on the ground last week, but I've already given her kind of her primary task here in the near term, which is from a marketing perspective, to begin to shape what the rollout of the strategic plan is going to be. And so, as I mentioned in May, during the May board meeting, I believe we're going to do that on Founders Day, and they're already working towards some products. And I'll have a short brief to talk to the board about where we are with the strategic plan and the work that's been done on laying out the strategic plan and how stakeholders are now starting to get after the tasks associated with those. Can't remember the number of objectives, but we'll talk about that. As well. And then I think this week, Dr. Andrew Luna is going to be on post and start working. So he's the new director of institutional research for Plaza to lead rates. He comes highly qualified. He's got like 25 years of experience in institutional research. He's been through a number of accreditations. I'll talk a little bit about accreditation and where we are in the process. I'll talk about that to the board here on that Monday. But Dr. Luna is a good find, and he's going to be on board to help lead us through those efforts. He was most recently at Austin Peay University as the executive director for decision support institutional research in Austin Peay and Clarksville, Tennessee. We will be sending, as far as accreditation, I'll talk a little bit about that, but the bottom line is we are getting ourselves organized for the upcoming accreditation in December. There's a conference that's going to be taking place down in Austin, Texas. And that usually is kind of the kickoff of the interaction between SACS, COC, and the institution that they're going to come and cover down on and go through the accreditation. So even though the accreditation doesn't start for us in earnest till fall, spring, with a report in the spring, there'll be a conference that will be held where they can kind of lay out for you the expectations of accreditation. And it'll be myself and the executive team will all go down and participate in that conference to get us ready for that.
So just back to the people, it sounds like with the communications and with the new research person, the search process went much more quickly than maybe in some of the previous ones. Were there some learnings that we picked up from those other ones that we applied to these new searches?
I don't have the specific amount of time. I would tell you that searches in higher education or government space, they do take a while, right? And because we put together a committee and because we go and have the notices go out, and it really depends on the quality of the candidates, right? Because you may have to hold a search open for longer than you would hope because the quality of the candidates is not there. In the case of Dr. Luna, you know, we ended up with 2 finalists and he was one of the 2. And I think one of them pulled out, right? In the case of Sherry Wallace, we actually settled on another candidate. They were, all 3 were good, to include the internal candidate that we had. All 3 were exceptional, but we thought that there was one that had a slight edge, but we couldn't come to terms with that particular candidate. So the process, I would say in some aspects, the process could be shortened, and it appears to be short, but then you have all of these other little perturbations and other little nuances that come into play.
Not easy, but that sounds like we got a little bit faster with these.
I think we're more deliberate. Yeah, I think the
great.
team the team knows how to put these things together. Yes, that's absolute fact, I think. Strategic plan. So I'll talk a little bit about the strategic plan. I've got a couple of slides to talk about the tasks and the strategic end states and how they've been identified. There's a set of priority objectives that I talked about during the last board meeting. I'll talk about those and why I feel like those are the ones that I need to devote the most of my time, while the remaining objectives and tasks tied to those initiatives have stakeholders, and every one of those stakeholders are responsible for that stuff. And so we'll talk about that and how that process is going to go and the intent. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Okay.
it's me.
All right. All right. Okay.
Conrad's not as old as I
am. And then I'll talk about those. And so the rollout that's being planned on Founders Day is going to be a website launch, a video series that we're going to put together, working with communications and marketing. We're going to try to enlist the help of the photogenic board president over here and get him involved. I said president. Yeah, I might have been looking at Teddy. Right. And then there'll be a social media campaign that'll start, and then a little bit before that, we're going to do just kind of a full-blown brief to the staff and faculty about it, so that they kind of understand a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of the strategic plan. And then there's other things that communications and marketing is going to be working on. As we thought about it, I said in the fall we would do it. I've had some discussions with David Prasnicki and the folks over at the alumni agencies about why I feel like the timing is right for the foundation, right? You have some of the most generous donors to the Institute. They come in, and oftentimes they're particularly focused on investment and donation in the Institute that is centered on academics and academic excellence. But I think that this be a good time to do it, because I think it helps define for them why now we're moving out with a strategic plan and presenting to them some ideas of some things that they can get on board with.
When we have the meeting, and it's the main board meeting, we'll be able to see all the task lists. We go out already broken down so we can see.
Yeah, the intent was, and I've got the document back here, The intent was to highlight down to the not down to the task level, but certainly if you want to see all the tasks, there's over 100 of them, like 105 of them.
Yeah, I mean,
If you want to see 105 tasks,
yeah, it's a strategic plan. I
Okay.
think it'd be good for the board to see it.
all right,
Definitely think we ought to see it before it's rolled out.
okay,
Anything jumps out at it.
okay, all right. So we'll have that. So that's the strategic plan. Then we'll talk a little bit about the housing in town issue again. I've already highlighted that, but again, I'll highlight the discussions that were had. And then in the closed session, my plan was to talk about the settlement, the NCAA settlement. So there's I mentioned before that based.
Yep, we can discuss that in the closed session.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So there'll be other topics that folks will be prepared to talk about, the athletic budget. I think what we'll be able to report is that because of the work that was done in managing the execution of both the institute's budget as a whole, as well as the athletic budget, that the projection of the fund balance for athletics, we did well, such that the fund balance that was projected to be erased did not. So we have some remaining fund balance as we head into this academic year of expenditures. And then with respect to the institute's budget as a whole, for the second year in a row, we added to the fund balance for the institute, just based on management controls of our funds, while still getting after some of the high priority projects and high priority efforts, and not diminishing the quality of the academic program and the look and feel of the institute. So we'll talk about that. I was asked to talk about the bomb threat that occurred over the summer over at W&L, and I'll be prepared to do that. Suffice it to say, we're going to lay out, I'll be able to show the board or talk about with the board a timeline associated with when the first bomb threat occurred over on W&L's campus, and then all the actions, both in terms of communication and actions on the ground by our police and by the staff that work emergency management and so on and so forth. So I'll be able to talk about that. Then also lessons learned. I'll be able to show the board, kind of what lessons we learned from the events and the actions that were taking place. So I think that's pretty much it from my vantage point, at least for right now. Is there anything else?
Does anybody have anything for the superintendent? I have one thing, it just not on the agenda, but just something that I've been thinking about. Securing the funding for Moody Hall,
Right.
move that schedule up a little bit. And this is just goes in the sort of I think we just need to be very effective in how we communicate to the alumni. And I think it's a VMI thing and an alumni agencies thing. Our alumni may not follow it as much, but you may know the timeline specifically. When does Moody Hall go down?
Next fall.
So next fall, Moody Hall will be demolished and the new building will come in. And I just encourage, maybe in the board meeting, you might want to have, it may be Dallas, you might want to have somebody do a presentation so the board is ready to answer questions and understand, how to explain this to alumni, because for, I don't know how long it'll be, a year, well,
About probably 2 years.
probably 2 years, we're not going to have an alumni hall.
Right.
I think we need to be really aggressive in communicating what that thing is going to look like, because I've seen Dallas's stuff. It's quite impressive.
Yeah.
And I just think we need to be thoughtful about getting in front of that.
Sure.
Sure. And making sure people are kind of aware and understand.
Sure. So there's a couple of things that we can talk about. Number one, as a part of the strat plan rollout, we've got some artist renderings of a number of projects to include some pretty impressive artist renderings of Moody Hall.
Yeah.
And so we'll be able to highlight those and show those. And then also the swing space that's already been procured and already been put to use by the alumni agencies. What do you call it? Outpost 1839. Yeah. So we can talk about that, and then what our plan is, right, to maximize the usage of the additional facilities that are out.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I just think that's something that, look, VMI graduates, myself included, we're an emotional people and we love that building, and we ought to make sure everybody's aware of what's going away and what's coming. So, and the timing. Anybody else have anything?
I have a couple questions, General, on some of the items brought up.
Sure.
The behavior of cadets uptown
Mhm.
and the video of the city council session, it was very embarrassing. Has anybody gone back? Has anybody from VMI gone to city council, publicly responded or said how we're gonna deal with that?
So Jeff Bubar and Lee Havrick they've not gone to the city council, but they have gone and spoken to the city manager, I believe. And they've had conversations with the chief of police, Chief Angela Green, and made a proposal about doing certain things to ensure that behavior, number one, is brought to the attention of institute officials, if that's the path that of notification that the police want to use. We got to bear in mind that obviously houses uptown that are owned and rented or just rented, right, are not necessarily under our purview to do anything about, unless there's bad behavior and then the police decide, well, we know that you're a VMI cadet, rather than us take action in terms of disturbance of the peace or something like that, we're going to turn you over to the post officials. But they've talked to Chief Green, they've talked to, I think, the city manager. I've talked to the mayor about it because the mayor presided over that city council meeting. And he and I had a discussion, and I assured him that we are going to take it seriously and make sure that the behavior is correct.
It's my understanding that you talked with the core leadership to say, stop this,
right?
Police yourself, which I think is great. It's where it's got to start. That's not the only answer. That's the thing. Back in our day, there was a formal mechanism called the executive committee, where if cadets spotted conduct unbecoming of cadets off post, there was a procedure where they could write that cadet up, and the Corps would deal with it and mete out punishment. Does that exist?
It does. It does.
Is it used? In my years back at BMI, starting my first go around on the board, I've never heard it mentioned. So is it emphasized and is it utilized the way it was in our day? I see cadets uptown with their blouses on. In our day, that wouldn't have happened. Somebody would have written them up.
Right. So there are a series of weekly GC trials that go on, and that's the mechanism that I understand is when cadets get reported for violations. And they could go from everything from taking a privilege to disrespect to things that are unbecoming of a cadet in town, or on post, or whatever. But those things do happen. I think, again, in the discussions with the cadet leaders, and I'll be meeting with all of them here real soon, because I meet with them roughly about once a month. It was emphasized to them that in the spirit of policing yourselves, you all as the first class, right, and you all as upperclassmen need to be doing this when you see bad behavior or behavior that is inconsistent with the code of conduct. So it is happening. I didn't go to one last year, but the year before I went to a couple of GC trials and watched how the cadets were performing those responsibilities. So yeah, it does happen. The executive committee, it's more, if you consider the executive committee being the class president, the class vice president of each class, they preside over the GC trials.
Right. In our day, the GC handled things on post, PC, which is the same body.
Yeah. Yes. And naming convention, they may still refer to it as that, but I've only heard of the GC as it, and the CEA. And I think when it comes to the Cadet Equity Association, what happened last year, and I'll need to double check with Lee Havard if it still applies, is the CEA has now been utilized, been defined more as as an investigative body. And then based on what the CEA finds, they can make recommendations to the GC, and then that could result in a GC trial as well. Or if it's Title IX related, it could get turned over to Title IX for further investigation or discipline to the commandant. So that's a little bit more flexibility with the CEA, if I'm correct. All right.
The other item is around accreditation.
Yeah.
And there's there's a lot that we talk about there, but I don't know a lot about it, but it's my understanding that when they come in and look at us, they don't necessarily look to see if we have policies covering everything.
Right.
But they look to see if our actions are consistent with the policies we do have in place.
Yep.
It's been pointed out for a couple of years now that right at the very top, the Institute regulations, they've been out of date for a long, long time. The overarching regulations are 9 years old.
Okay.
The last revision was in May of 2015. It's full of inaccuracies in how we operate today. The regulations part 1 passed in 2020, it needs updating. Regulations part 2, and all these, you go to the governance, they're staring us in the face. Regulation part 2 last revised 10 years. They're all out of date.
Right.
So when are we going to update those? Because that's, if the first thing they look at is our governing regulations and we're not following them, they're going to go, wow, they can't even get that right.
Sure. So that work is already underway. The chief of staff has been working with the Institute execs, right, to go through the document. Part of it is, the reorganization that we did as I came in. We've got kind of a top line reorganization that needs to be reflected in the roles and responsibilities of Institute officials. So that work is being done. And then the specific definition of requirements that are contained in that regulation. I will make sure that the chief can speak to it and talk about the timeline under which we expect to finish that. It should be done here this year, well in advance of any accreditation efforts. Same thing with the policies of the Institute, right? Over the course of the year, we typically go through the policies of the Institute at the IPC level, Institute Policy Committee, and then at the Institute Executive Committee to review the policies and update the policies. That's another area that the accreditation bodies are going to be looking at as well to find consistency with how we go through accreditation and whether or not our policies and procedures match what we're doing and the goals and responsibilities of those institute officials. So it's already underway, and the policy reviews have been going on a fairly routine basis ever since John Young got here as the chief. So I know those by and large are being updated. It's the task of, and we were made aware of this and started doing work on it here probably towards the end of the summer. So we'll have that done. I'll have them speak to the time.
I brought it up a year ago, year and a half ago. I don't think I'm the only one. Reorganization. A few years and a couple of years in.
Yes.
This needs to get done.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, we've each year, and I'll do it again this year, I'll show you kind of what the organization looks like this year. We're not making any changes to the organization, so we kind of settled into that. The only thing that I'll show about the organization will be kind of a hire in a position that has occurred. And so now that we're doing that, now that we are kind of have ourselves in a good rhythm in terms of the normal actions that take place, battle rhythm, how meetings occur, the purpose of the meetings, what reports being given, we'll get it done.
Anything else? Anybody else?
Good job, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's move to, if I'm doing this right. Some organizational updates just for everyone. You've seen the new committee and the new committee structures. I just want to talk through that for a moment. We'll talk about the bylaw changes and some other things. This whole section is really sort of, I think, an effort to streamline our meetings, to make our meetings more efficient and more effective. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So first of all, on the new structure of the committees, first and foremost, we welcome 3 new board members. I don't know if y'all have had a chance to meet them or know them. Quentin Elliott, Clifford Foster, and Bill Janis. Good group. Bill spent, I don't know, a decade. I don't have anything in front of me, but a decade in the House of Delegates. I think that's a pretty meaningful experience that will help him, especially on the External Relations Committee. Quentin was a cabinet secretary in Virginia. Great career with the Virginia Department of Transportation and also a reserve military officer. And then Clifford Foster was a tennis player at VMI. And so he's going to be helping out on the athletics committee, very involved in the financial space. And they've already really jumped in. I think at the football game this weekend, I was there, Jamie Inman was there, Quentin came, Clifford came. I'm probably missing somebody, but it's good to have them on board and they've jumped in. So generally the committees, kind of like as you would expect, Ernie Edgar is taking over the Cadet and Military Affairs Committee. He was sort of next person up on that list. Same with Jamie Inman on Academic Affairs. Damon will continue to have the reins on the Athletic Committee. Got to get some more wins on that football field, Damon. Teddy will continue to chair AF&P, which when I took over, I did a little homework on other college public boards in Virginia just to see how other schools structured themselves. And that's not because I'm a fan of copying them. We're so unique. We do our own thing and that's fine. But I realized that AF&P committee is in most public colleges about 3 different committees. The work that they do, it really is extraordinary. Conrad agreed to continue on and chairing the nominating and governance committee, which is important. For the changes, asked Nancy Phillips to step into external relations. And she's going to have a good support team there with her, with Teddy and Damon and Megan and Bill, because there's going to be a lot of work to be done in that committee. And so she and I have talked about that. I think she's happy to have a great team with her. Hugh had chaired that committee. With my departure from appeals, I thought it made sense to have Hugh over there. He chaired that committee before. He was on the honor court as a cadet, and so I talked with Hugh about that, and I think he was pleased to do that. And then we have our new committee, Cadet and Personnel Affairs. So I want to talk a little bit about that. That's sort of next on the agenda. This has been a topic of discussion, and let me just say this before we get into that. I had to do some moving, right, which is why some people change some committees, just from the sheer practicality of we meet in thirds. So you got to divide the board up, right? And so the Cadet and Personnel Affairs Committee is a new committee, so that created a couple conflicts where I had to move folks. I tried to keep people generally on the committees they'd had, although moving around on committees isn't necessarily a bad thing for folks. So let me talk about Cadet and Personnel Affairs. This has been a subject of discussion for a long time. That there are certain areas where several of us felt like we didn't really have insight into areas that are very important to the Institute. And, we always receive a thoughtful and meaningful brief on Title IX issues as a full board in the closed session, but we don't have that Title IX group assigned to a committee. And we tried it when Tom was president. We worked together. We kind of tried to see if we could fit it into the appeals committee. We had a meeting where we did that. We sort of felt like, I think a bunch of us felt like Title IX was an area where we needed some more insight than just the whole committee receiving a brief in the closed session. Human resources is an area that a lot of people have identified that we just haven't had a whole lot of insight. And it's an area that I think, needs oversight. And so we had that. Then there's this whole other group of incredibly important things, if you think about it, to cadets, right? And the phrase I used in the bylaws changes as well-being that we don't ever hear from. We never heard from the Cadet Counseling Center. We never heard from the chaplain. We never heard from a lot of these groups that are involved. So what we did was we took the Inclusive Excellence Committee and we took a couple pieces from the core, what used to be the Cadet and Military Affairs Committee, which had a huge kind of like AF&P, a huge area of responsibility. And we peeled off the cadet part. We added personnel because all of us are always focused on the cadets, but our job is to oversee the entire institute, and we have faculty and staff who are being hired and dealing with HR and all the things that come along with HR issues, but we really didn't have any insight into that. And so now we have this new committee, and I'll just read it to the bylaws change. We can get to that in a minute. I'll just read it for everyone. Cadet and Personnel Affairs Committee. The Cadet and Personnel Affairs Committee is responsible for the oversight of all human resources matters relating to VMI's faculty and staff, as well as the health, well-being of the entire VMI community. The committee shall consider inputs from, all right, and this is where some of our committees are sort of singularly focused in some ways, right? I mean, the athletics committee, it's, the athletic director is in the hot seat, if you will, for that committee. The Corps and Military Affairs, the Commandant is. But some of our committees have sort of multiple facets to it, and this is one that does. So what we said is that the committee will consider inputs from the Director of Human Resources, the Inspector General and the Title IX Coordinator, the Chief Diversity Officer, the Director of the Cadet Counseling Center, the Institute Physician. I hadn't included that one. And when I met with the chief, he actually thought we should add that as an area that we should hear from, and I think that's a good idea. And the Institute Chaplain, among others. So the administration official that's going to oversee this committee is the chief. And all of these folks who you see there, I'm certain they're going to be in attendance, perhaps give reports, but the chief will oversee this committee. Megan Mobbs agreed to chair this, and I'm very grateful for that. And I've had a meeting with both her and with the chief about the committee and how it will function. So I think this is a good move for us. I think it's going to give us insight into a sort of a broader sense of how our cadets, if you think about as they go through their daily lives, when you think about their overall well-being and the well-being of our faculty and staff, that's the idea behind this committee. So that's the breakdown of the committee assignments. And then for the bylaws changes, my understanding is we just discussed them. And what I'd like to do is say they've already been presented to the board. We meet and we recommend approval to the board. Is that the right language?
So,
how it'll happen?
technically, they come up through,
Through you.
yes.
That's right.
So I think what I just want is maybe the executive committee recommends this to the nominating committee and the nominating committee present it. That's probably, I think, how it's supposed to happen under the bylaws. Be fine.
Okay. And I should add that you and I spoke about this.
Yes, sir.
We've been talking about this, right?
Right, and that's a copy to everyone in the nomination committee of the revised bylaw that Kate and the other members that were not in there.
Okay.
For nothing speaking to them. Okay. with everything.
Okay. Good. Any discussion or?
Yeah, John, first off, I would characterize the way you described the last couple of years that we thought this through is absolutely correct. There's ways that we need to be sure we brought more pieces together and maybe more fully implemented some of the things we did over the last few years into the everyday life of the cadet and into leadership training that we have our cadets come through. But I would ask us to look at the language though, because I pivot back to unfortunate period of time when no one around the table was here except the superintendent and I, which was July of 2021. The board approved 3 very simple objectives around diversity, inclusion, and things of that nature. And those were very important guiding posts for at least some of us over a period of time. And unfortunately, if you compare the language, and now you might say that's going to be covered, but the point is people will look for what's missing from what we've done historically to what we're doing in the future. And I think it's a real bad day if in fact people believe some of those objectives that we set out in 2021 are no longer important to this board. So I have some serious reservations as draft.
Yeah, I hear you, Tom.
I'm not alone, by the way. I don't think. I may be alone around this table, but I don't think I'm alone as a board member too.
Okay. Yeah, I actually, it's interesting when I
always use the word devil in the details. So high level, completely for there.
Right.
The devil in the details is enormously important, as is the communication, because people will look I believe, some audiences of ours will look very carefully to see whether or not this is a digression from things we've done over the last several years.
a couple.
Sure, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I have some commentary in essence of, because when I come on the board, it's diversity, and I think it's a statement how that we had that in our, in our strategic plan. Which I think should be emphasized in our bylaws. To the degree of the work that we put in. See that we're not totally away. It's like kind of away with some of this. So much of our language is correct.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Fair point. Let me ask this question: Are you concerned? Set aside the language in the bylaws. Are you concerned about the new committee or the structure?
Well, it's a little hard to answer the question because if the charge is just what's written here, I'm not convinced we're focused as much as we should on the right issues, and we're sending a signal maybe to some people that we don't intend to send, actually, John. So as I said, I'm always I've been with this for a 3 years about the further evolution of this function, actually.
Right.
It's the devil in the detail part of it here. So if anybody could construe what we announced as a lack of commitment and actually a digression from some of the things we've done the last several years, we could find ourselves right back in the same problem we were in a few years ago in terms of just some of the anxiety about what we are as an institution, what we stand for.
Okay. Damon, what about you? Are you okay with the change in structure of the committee, or is it mainly the language in this, or is it?
The structure, I mean, I don't know, the personal affairs committee. I mean, I think we still can. We're looking at a high level of this right here, but the details, I think it's just.
Yeah. Let's think about it. I'll give you some of my thinking as I went through it. The first was, and again, anybody who knows me knows I think of VMI as the most unique place in the world. So I don't look at other colleges as setting the standard we necessarily have to follow. I will note, I didn't see, I could be corrected, but I didn't see any other public college in Virginia that had one committee dedicated solely to diversity and inclusion issues. Not that we shouldn't, not that it was, just from sort of a pattern and practice. From the length of the description of the committee, obviously it's actually stood out, right? If you look at the other committees, they're all like 3 sentences for what their assignments are. I tried to actually make this committee more in conformity with the rest of the committees. I think maybe the appeals committee is a little bit long. Maybe nominations is long, but the Inclusive Excellence Committee had a massive, charter. Maybe there's some language that we should include in there that would make people feel better. On a down to like brass tacks substantive matter, I don't see us as walking back from our commitments at all. I think, if anything, and this is how I feel, we came out of those experiences, Tom, that you were involved in, and I think, I don't want to speak for anybody else, so I won't. We launched a lot of initiatives in the diversity space, and I think my impression is that we've done nothing but gotten better at it. But that's, and so I don't perceive, we have a need, I think, as a board to have insight into these other areas, and I think this is the right place to put it so that everything is getting its appropriate.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, the earlier drafting, in my opinion, was not good. So that's not the benchmark. For me, the benchmark was July 8th, 2021, when we did a release about our objectives. And then the governance should have wrapped around those objectives. And we got off that track, quite honestly, with a lot of this detail that I think was not helpful. So I have no ownership in that narrative, but I do have a sense of responsibility to see that those 3 objectives of 21 are kind of carried forward. So maybe we're asking to go back and can we draft it? Because again, if you just read the headline, it looks like this is more about HR. And I don't think it's healthy to have a drafting session around a table this, an open session. So I'm not sure that's the right thing to do. So all I really want to do is voice my sort of perfect, and ask people to go back to a period of time, which unfortunately there was only one person here at the time, which was Cedric and myself. But that's public knowledge about those 3 objectives. And then, by the way, the 3 objectives that many of us business had in place for 20 odd years. So it's not like this is out there and, some kind of progressive kind of, theme.
Agreed on a drafting session here is not a great idea. Bill, let me ask you this from a governance perspective. We presented this change to the board. If we go back and change this, does that restarts the 10-day clock, I assume?
Pat can correct me if I'm wrong, but if there are changes that come through the committee and are voted on by the board, they would take effect.
That's
okay.
kind of logical.
Well, then why don't we take that? Maybe we can have some one-on-one discussion. Sure, and before, this is why we did this meeting a week before. We'll all work together to see what we can come up with. And something that, as you said, will make people understand we're not walking away from anything. I think we're actually getting better and better at it. But that's, again, I don't want to speak for anybody, but that's my take.
Okay. Yeah.
Sound good?
And that's where I'm coming from too, by the way. So that's why I'm conscious of being sure we don't appear, not intentionally, but appear as though we're taking a step back.
Yeah.
Related. Maybe 20, 25 years ago, we might have had a board committee that had responsibility for Title IX sex issues. We haven't modern them. We ought to be touting this as stepping up attention by giving a committee the responsibility for anything related to Title IX, issues around male-female relations, board.
There's no doubt. Yeah, that's something we,
And that was the idea, I think, originally,
Right.
was it's all conduct. It's that not just things that were racial, not just things that were gender, not just things that were assault. It's all conduct, actually. Those are our terms, Title IX, diversity office, whatever.
cadet counseling.
Those are our little labels, but the reality is the big picture is on the full relationship that conduct we expect of people across all those fronts.
Right. I think that's right.
And the labels are kind of interesting, but they're only unique to us. No one on the outside cares about those labels. And we don't sell this as a commitment internally. I don't think using those labels, we talk about it the way we're talking.
Back to your point, Tom, about losing the emphasis on inclusive excellence, and the devil in the details. I don't know what the initial goals of this committee are, but one of them could be early on to examine those board goals and reaffirm them, or update them, or just bring them back to the full board and say, we're reconfirming this is what we're about.
I think one of the things we talked about today is a dashboard even. What are the things we should be monitoring? Actually, not to get into the specifics, but other trends. Are we seeing more of this, less of that?
This is 100% true,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so,
Where are we on attrition?
yeah. And so it's
Where
a
are we on?
one-stop shop for that kind of information. Again, not to micromanage or take away from the ability for the superintendent and the team to make judgments, but there's a level of information for us that we can see trends.
Good.
Yeah, so, sorry, John, to get off.
No, that's all right. That actually, though, it made me realize I forgot one incredibly important part on the membership of the board and the structure of the board. We've talked about this a little bit. So we are obligated under state law to have, I'll use state law lingo, a student member of the board. And so we have, in the spirit of that law, had the first class president as a member of the board ex officio for time immemorial. I'll use that phrase to be as precisely imprecise as I can be. We have decided, just looking at state law and looking at our bylaws, we need to be a little bit more precise about it. And so the first class president is an ex officio member of the board. At the next meeting, you will see him sitting at the table. He has been given committee assignments. He's not listed on here yet, but we should add him.
He is.
Is he? Oh, did he make it on this one? Oh, good. Perfect. There he is. So, Teddy, I go back to your question of the superintendent about the EC. Now we got a board member we can put in the hot seat on this when we meet in a week. I think having him on the board would be great. I was literally in the barracks for taps on Friday night before the football game, and he came walking in, and he was all excited because he said, "I got my on-board login. I'm ready to go." He was fired up. So I think that's actually going to be actually has the potential to be pretty meaningful for us. So very, very pleased about that. New board meeting schedule.
Sorry, before we're off the bylaws, can I make a couple of comments?
Yes.
These don't require changes, but I think there's some requirements in bylaws that we're not fulfilling to the extent that we probably should be. One of them is around improving admission standards, which we haven't done. And so I'm hoping that the Academic Affairs Committee can do that. Bylaws say that board shall determine and define requirements for admission. That's a deficiency, I'd say. Another is oversight of gifts and responsible for regular detailed reports on expenditures and activities, basically from the alumni agency. John, you know this. I've reached out to David Kresnick and asked him, I pointed this out, suggested maybe talk with you about improving the flow of information from the agencies to us, because in my opinion, we're falling short there. The final one, and this one I'd like some action, maybe the next executive. Board is responsible for approving all requests for funds that VMI makes to the state. And I've been scratching my head on this file because I don't recall us as a board approving the request for the made to the state. In a pre-meeting with Dallas Clark on AFP, I raised this with him and he said, yes, you do. The board does approve it. And I said, how? He said, it's in the 6-year plan document that we approve every year. And that comes through the AFP. And for the last 2 years, I've brought that to the board to be approved. I had no idea that was in there because we really haven't talked about it. And sure enough, the funding requests are in the document, but the way it's always been brought to the committee and to the board, that 6-year plan is more just a cap on future tuition fees. It's more routine. So I'd like to suggest that we pull that item out because it's important. Like funding requests to the state, VMI makes, and we take it as a separate item for at least for the executive board. And I'm not implying that there's anything inappropriate going on. It's just that we should, as a board, see that, ponder it, or it goes through and not simply rubber stamp it. And in this case, the timing is difficult. I don't see us changing anything because it's my understanding, you know, we meet on the 17th and the request has to be in on the 20th. And I think the capital request is either already submitted or going to be.
It's already submitted.
So we just need to improve that process.
Yeah.
No bylaw change, but just a process change to get that in a sequence to where board pays proper attention.
Sounds completely logical to me.
Is it just awareness of what's the state line?
Right? And if there's any discussion that thinks we're supposed to do, we're approving it, that means we have a responsibility to make sure that it's appropriate.
Teddy, I remembered you had brought these up last year to an email, and one of the things we had talked about was in admissions. I think last year, John, you may have been there, we went through all the admission determination and the waiting. Dusty was in charge of it. And I thought we had brought that up for a motion because it doesn't say whether it needs to be done annually. But then the admissions should have, because we were giving a couple of points requests for, oh gosh, what's the technical term? Like if you attended the school, not alumni, that became an issue. Legacy. And I'm assuming the admissions had to take I think it was like 2 points out of 10. I don't think we've ever gone back to that. I don't know if you remember that session we had on the admissions committee, but I think it rolled in. So that could be something that we could look at because I do think we rolled that admissions policy in at one time as part of that in the past couple of years, where they gave us the weighting scale and how they put some courses off. But I do recall all these issues that you were, and I think I think some of these, Eddie, like you said, are rolled in as part of these very large packages that we get in here. So that's something you can ask Jamie.
Yeah, for sure. I think these are all
Yeah, those are good.
very good governance points that we should absolutely do that. But none of that strikes me as, okay. I wish I had a better memory of that. I don't. So two other quick things. These are designed to make the meetings more efficient and more allow the board to have just more time together to focus on what I think we should be focused on, which is strategic, vision type discussions. I am not wedded to this first one on the agenda, which is the new board meeting schedule. I think we're going to try it this time and see how it is. I'm cognizant it's a volunteer board. It's important, but like this is going to cause people to have to leave work a little bit earlier on the first day. But I do want to try it. And if you think it is successful, I'll take credit for it. If you think it's a bad idea, I'll pass it on to Bill Wyatt. Just kidding. It was Bill's idea. I think it's a good one. But let's try it at the next board meeting and see. What it'll essentially do is we'll have those 3 meetings before the executive committee meets and before we all meet at the superintendent's quarters on the first night, which means the second day we free up ourselves a lot of time instead of the rushing to 3 meetings. I think there's a lot of benefit in our board meetings to time where we're not actually in the meeting, where board members get a chance to talk, where committee chairs can talk informally about issues that cross committees. And so let's give it a go, see what happens at this board meeting, and then we can reconvene and see if we think it was effective or if we'd like to go back to the old way. I'm not totally wet on it, but I think we should try it. The second issue, although given what we just discussed, maybe it's not a good idea. The second issue, though, is a consent calendar. We spend a lot of time in the formal meeting approving things in a real lockstep kind of manner. It takes a lot of time. And Bill and I have talked about it. Bill, do you want to take just a couple seconds?
Sure. I mean, typically, when things are considered by the board, they come up through the committee. The committee chair, during their committee report, will read the motion and we'll go through the process of approving that specific motion. And a lot of times these are perfunctory, they're very routine, they're non-controversial, and it just takes up time when we're trying to fit so much into the short amount of time that we have together. So the legislature does this all the time with bills that aren't controversial. They just put them on a consent calendar. So all the information is in your onboard portal right now. You can see the motions, you can see the backup documentation, you can look at it ahead of time. If there's something on there that you would like to dig in to a little more, or you would want to ask questions, it's the member's privilege to pull it off of that consent calendar. There wouldn't need to be a vote on whether it stays on the consent calendar or not. You can just raise a point of order and say, I'd like to pull this one off the consent calendar. But basically you're voting on them as a block. And so those are all out of the way, ideally in just a matter of 30 seconds or so, minutes, lists of graduates and, things that during my time, we've never had any substantive discussion on. But they're important and there's a role for the board to approve those. So we're going to give it a try as long as you guys are open to that and it works.
Yeah, and literally any board member can pull something off the consent calendar just by asking. So, all right, I think that takes care of everything we have for the open session. So
I have one more, just to, since we're together, I think I should comment on the audit.
Oh yeah, I think so.
The audit for 2023 year just recently was received. It's way late. State gave us. It's not one of the better ones we've ever had. There were 6 items identified in their deficiencies. Of the 6, 1 was identified as material weakness, which is highly unusual. And the other 5 were significant deficiencies. Of those 5, 3 were recurring, old ones that had been identified and fixed in time for that 2023 audit. I don't think we have a particular issue that is pervasive. Two or three of the items were IT related. Just need to tighten up things there, and they know what they are, working on it. The one material deficiency was a new policy that all schools had to adopt. It's complex, and we got on it late, not enough resources to get it done properly. So I don't think we have issues. The only issue we may have, and it's hard for me to get the words out of my mouth because manpower, more manpower is not something that, but you know, I had a session with the state auditor. She pointed out that we are lean compared to most of the colleges. She gave some specifics and kind of made the comment that, over the years, the requirements have increased. They never take items off the audit, they just continue to add to them. And maybe we haven't kept up with the staffing needed in this area. I don't know, but I'm just raising it as one possible issue. But I would never just throw people like Dallas is on these, his team is on them. Most of them have been fixed already. They just weren't fixed in time for 2023 audit, which ended in June of last year. So just didn't want to go through an executive committee without saluting. General, any comments?
No, I'm aware of the both the APA audit and the 3 audits actually. Baker Tilly, which we had contracted for a outside agency to come and give us a look, and then another one was the EPA one, which I think is the one that you're talking about. And so certainly they highlighted a couple of deficiencies in the IT arena, and I think some of those occurred with or didn't get adjusted and completed with the transition of Wes Robinson's retirement, and then the search and subsequent hiring of Daryl. What's Daryl's last name? That's the new Daryl Campbell as the new director of IT. And so again, they've been given a 60-day suspense, I believe, in order to get those deficiencies corrected, and then make a determination or come back and tell me whether or not we have an ability to call the auditors and request a relook, or whether we just need to make the corrections, document the corrections that have been made to the deficiencies, and then be prepared for the next audit. And then there was another deficiency in the financial management arena, and I think that was largely due to the reorg that occurred, where we had a financial analyst, accounting certified financial analyst, and when he left, there was some reorganization that was done because of the difficulty to find a backfill hire. And so Dallas has come to me and asked me for permission to carve that position back out of the reorg and restructure in such a way where we can go after and recruit and hire somebody of a similar caliber of the CPA accountant certified person that we had previously.
Okay.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. At this time, right at about 1,500 on the nose. I entertain a motion that the board go into a closed meeting to discuss matters related to the employment, assignment, appointment, or performance of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the public body, and evaluation or performance of departments or schools of public institutions of higher education pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1, relating to the evaluation of the superintendent's performance and discussion of individual personnel matters. Second, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.23711A7, pertaining to actual or probable litigation of the Institute. And third, consultation with legal counsel regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.23711A8. Do I have a motion? Vote. Approved? Approved. Aye. All right.
Should I have, based on what I talked about with respect to the agenda, is there anything in terms of guidance that I need to hear from the board? In terms of topics, in terms of content?
For the agenda for next week, I don't think so, and if so, I can reach out to you if there's
All right.
some specifics.
I raised the one around the state funding request. I think that'd be a good one for the executive.
Okay.
Rather than full board,
Just have them pull it out and bring it to us.
and discuss. it.
Yeah.
You know, there's positions being added, tell us what they are, why.
Okay.
We should have a discussion.
Okay.
I mean, want to do it in committee, different committee, that's fine, it's up to you.
Let's talk about it. All right, anything else? Motion to close the meeting. So,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right, there we go.
Thank you.
Good meeting.
All right, I really do thank y'all for coming.
Thank you for hosting it, Serge.
Yeah.
Bill, while you were out of the room, I know we're not supposed to talk about these things, but the comment about the cookies came up at the very end. Maybe you need to up your game a little bit with the cookies.
I mean, game on, sitting there with a whole stack.
See the evidence.
See you next week. Take care. See you next week.
See you too.